welcome to the channel. Today's recreating segment is an homage for Pascal Arbès Nicolas, aka Vitalic. And the song that we are gonna use today in this musical production exercise belongs to Vitalic's very first release album, called it OK Cowboy, released in 2005, more specifically track number 6 entitled The Past. And this is in good time because Vitalic just released a 20-year anniversary celebration remaster of OK Cowboy alongside to a very nice documentary about the makings of the album, in which Pascal gives details about the gears he used and the artistic production.
Là, j'ai vraiment appris à me servir à faire la musique avec des softwares. J'avais utilisé un Moog, j'ai toujours aimé les sons Moog, un Moog Voyager. J'ai utilisé synthé Alesis, Andromeda, qui fait beaucoup de sons rock, qui faisait beaucoup mes sons saturés, et puis un petit Evolver pour les sons guitare. Des belles machines, mais peu de machines.
Super interesting documentary, both technically and artistically, totally worth to check it out. But without further ado, let me show you what I have learned while trying to recreate this vintage classic. I have started my process by creating the sound of the bass in the Mini Moog. And I used this first sound to learn the song. Then I knew I wanted to use the OB6 to recreate that fat lead solo line. So then the only big sound missing was the choir pads, for which I went to my choir to go patch on the Osmose to get some hardware expression. But the hard work for me starts in production, by bringing in the reference track and setting it up on a tempo grid to start figuring out the rhythms. What you see here is already my final session, rearranged so you get the condensated version of the song, so that we could focus on the main sound design elements I wanted to bring for you today. And with my credentials of a basement synth enthusiast, these were the drum pattern variations that I could dissect from Vitalic's pulsating techno rhythms. Starting from a standard 4 on the floor, but subdividing the 16 step into 32 for the hi-hats, in my case with slight variations of swing depending on the pattern. Transitioning then to a simple drum fill, adding an extra snare on beat number 2. You got the feeling. And then in my arrangement here, that on the bridge between choruses is very similar to the original, I have returned to the first 4 on the floor pattern to then introduce a second drum fill variation, this time with an extra snare on beat 16, as well as a change of cadence on the hi-hats. And it is on the hi-hats that Vitalic surfaces one of the strongest inspirations of OK Cowboy, the recurrent theme of a fanfare that gets its own track in this album. So we get a drum fill, we are back into the initial 4 on the floor to then introduce a new variation with a rim shot. And this will be the basis for the second chorus when the vocoder harmony is introduced. But this is when it gets a little messy here, because in the original song, this is when you're gonna have the drop. But in my arrangement here, I've tried to glue the second chorus with the synth solo already. And this solo rhythm was for me one of the hardest subdivisions of hi-hats to figure it out. I am probably not honoring the original here, with all the solo rhythm variations, but I was so proud that I figured out a division that worked for me that I have considered my job done. If you actually know how to program a drum beat, please shout out in the comments and help this synth nerd here. I have done this last variation here and I let it roll, alternating between the two patterns until the end of the solo. When thinking about the synthesizers I've used, I want to spend more time in the sounds in which I've sound designed, but at least I can show you that I have used the preset Lost Choir in the Osmose for my pad sounds, and for the solo lead on the OB6, what I used was 2 oscillators set to saw with post-width modulation, but the main reason for choosing the OB6 here was the Oberheim vintage character given by its chorus and bucket brigade delay hardware native effects. But I want to spend more time with you in the Mini Moog, looking into how to recreate the bassline sound, since this is a classical subtractive synthesis setup. And for this sound, I am using a single oscillator that is overdriven by the feedback loop on the Mini Moog architecture, and this oscillator is set to saw and tuned to 32 feet for the bass sound. Nothing too fancy on my amplifier envelope, with no attack, short decay, and a half-away sustain level that gives you an expression of playing bass. But it is on the filter and its envelope that the magic of these sounds really happen. With the cutoff frequency half-away shut for the bassy sound, a bit resonant with the emphasis at around 3, to create the Y effect when the filter sweeps with modulation, and the amount of modulation from the envelope set to 6 at the contour level, we have the cutoff frequency opening and closing at the decay time only, with a low sustain level to keep the sound muffled. I have added aftertouch modulation to the cutoff frequency of the filter for a little extra expression, as well as a short time glide to get funky. In the arrangement, I have also used virtual instruments, like for instance Pigments from Arturia, to create the ear candy, simply because Pigments has this very friendly workflow to route the LFO modulation, in this case this morphed square wave, to create this very fast and choppy vibrato effect. But if we share the same interests, one of the most interesting elements in this era in French electronic music was the vocoder, that both allows no singers to sing, but carry a whole aesthetics of electronic music from the most influential electronic music pioneers like the German Kraftwerk. So the first step for me was to record the spoken lyrics and quantizing it to keep the modulation in rhythm. And this is how the modulator track sounds without a carrier. Here we are, the final credits. Youth will have its feelings, that why. Not the sexiest, but okay, you got my point. Justifiable sacrifice of my dignity in the name of music. Things only starts to get interesting when you add the carrier, which in my case is this 2 oscillator synthesizer from Arturia's vocoder virtual instrument that are set as saw and square respectively. Thus, the way the vocoder works as a virtual instrument in my DAW is that I sidechain my modulator, in my case the spoken lyrics, as the modulator for the carrier synth that I can play and record in MIDI as a regular virtual instrument. And the main reason for me to choose Arturia's vocoder was the ease for me to add an LFO at the end of my vocoder processing chain to recreate again that choppy vibrato effect that you hear in the original recording. But if you got that far with me in my long explanation, one of the most satisfying moments for me on recreating this song was to reproduce the harmonies of the second chorus that creates these beautiful melancholic vibes of this song. Well, I hope you found this exercise entertaining. I always learned a lot when trying to recreate the songs of my favorite artists, and hopefully you also learned something along the way. That's what I had for today, and as always, thanks for watching.